Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this episode of From the Suggestion Box, navigating feedback, the good, the bad, and the say, well, making sure the good stuff doesn't go to your head and the bad stuff doesn't go to your heart. I am so excited to have our special guest today, Miss Jessica Ping Parks. Many of you have known about her. She is making strides in our community as one of our top consultants. But I will let her tell you a little bit about herself. Jessica, welcome.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me. I am Jessica. I am really excited to be here, and I focus on volunteer and community engagement strategy. So I'm taking the experience I have working at some of Canada's largest nonprofits, as well as a volunteer center, and volunteering my time with grassroots groups and with the professional associations we have in our community, and bringing that to life for nonprofit clients who are looking to build more trust and build more genuine buy-in with their stakeholders.
Wonderful. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay, y'all. So we're just going to dive right in. I encourage you to put your seatbelts on because it's going to be a wild ride. The scarcity mindset in nonprofits and having discussions about uncomfortable truths in nonprofit. Ugh. Elaborate on that. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. So when I first started working in the nonprofit sector, having been a volunteer, through my youth, through my university days, I really had this image of the nonprofit sector as a place where things were really good and lovely and kind of like an antithesis to the corporate sector,
Yeah.
right? And after working for, I would say, not very long, like a year to 3 years, I was like,
That long? No.
no, but I was like, something's going on, right? Like, I have this idea in my mind of what this work is supposed to be, but there are things happening in my workplace that are toxic,
Hmm.
right? I'm seeing tokenization
Hmm.
of community members.
Hmm.
I'm seeing bullying
Hmm.
among staff members. I'm seeing financial donors being elevated to a special status, whereas time donors, volunteers, are just volunteers. So I was like, this is weird, right? And I was like, what is this feeling? What is this feeling? It's uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, and I love because one of the things that really like struck me when we were talking, you're like, listen, working in nonprofit is not all unicorns and what'd you say, sunshine and rainbows and unicorns? It is not
It
that.
is not sunshine and rainbows, right? And I wish I could go back to, 20 years ago and tell myself that.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about from the standpoint of somebody who is very new in the profession, kind of like you and I were at one point.
Yeah.
And then you start seeing all these things and you're like, oh my gosh, right? We definitely don't want to scare people away, but we want to prepare you, right?
Mhm.
Let's talk about what is your definition of scarcity mindset?
Okay. So, scarcity mindset, you're going to hear this a lot in nonprofits. We don't have enough, right? We
Oh,
don't have enough funding. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough volunteers. And what the next sentence usually is some version of, well, let's just make do with using this data that we haven't really figured out if it complies with current privacy laws. Let's just make do with going to the same volunteers who are already burned out and
Right.
have been telling us that, but let's tell them that, this initiative isn't going to work without them giving more of their time, right?
Yeah.
So it's things like that. It's that mindset of we don't have enough. And kind of parallel to that and partnered with that is the mindset that there's a competition
Hmm.
between us and our nonprofit and the other nonprofits in our town, in our city, in our country, right? There's only so many dollars, there's only so many volunteers, there's only so much attention span. So we've got to compete and we've got to beat out the next town's food bank. We've
Right.
got to beat out the children and youth services that's, two blocks over serving the same community. And really, what drives success and serving the people that we intend to serve is collaboration
Hmm.
and partnership
Hmm.
and not competition.
Right.
But it's again that scarcity mindset.
Yeah. So, and just to follow up right where you're talking about. So when
Mhm,
I used to work for a performing arts center in Miami,
mhm.
there was another performing arts center, like literally no lie, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe up the
Yeah,
street, right?
yeah.
And the volunteer manager and I, at the time, we became really good friends.
Mhm,
And we actually, just like you said, we collaborated on a lot of things. We shared a lot of things back and forth to help each other, all these kinds of things. And you know what we discovered? We discovered two things. Number one, we shared a lot of volunteers.
mhm.
So, to that one point, just because there is that food bank doesn't mean that they won't volunteer at yours too.
Yeah,
People who volunteer tend to volunteer in more than one place. Now, I don't have like, I'm sure I can find statistical data somewhere, but just after living it,
yeah.
like a third of the volunteers that I had at my theater also volunteered at her theater.
Right.
So we were like, so it was beautiful because also the fact that we talked a lot, we were also able to quell all of the nonsense that they would come back with
Mm.
each other. Well, at the other performing arts theater, I was like, no, they don't, because that's one of my best friends. And I just talked to her yesterday, and I could tell you for a fact that's not the case because policy states, and I have the paper. And now they're like, oh, so instead of us being afraid of each other, we were completely transparent with each other.
Right.
And they'd be
Yeah.
like, yeah, no. So they would try and come and tell us stuff. Well, we'd be like, no. And they would go and try to tell her stuff. And she'd be like, no. But then also, we had really great ideas from each
Yes.
other. We were like, oh, she would come to our trainings. I would
Yes.
go to her trainings. It really taught us not to fear each other because,
Mm.
yes. And like I said, one third, right? So that means two-thirds were not driving across the county line for nothing, right?
Yeah.
And same for
Yep.
her. They weren't driving down the county line for nothing. But we did have that intersection of some that did both. And so
Mhm.
it wasn't competition. There was various reasons, and those who weren't driving the county lines, there were specific reasons, there were specific things that we had that the other didn't have, that they weren't interested in, and vice versa. And then we had some who loved both.
Yeah.
Wasn't a competition. And
Yeah.
we worked so well together for years. For
Yeah.
years we did. So I just wanted to really like share that example based on what you said. Like ours was like a real life story. And I love what you said about, we're always telling our volunteers, oh, we can't do it without you, and all of this kind of thing. And language matters. Like when you
Hmm.
say things like that to volunteers, they put on the burnout. Then they're like, oh
A
my God,
hundred
don't
percent.
show up. They're not going to be able to get it done without us. And
Yeah.
then it's that whole people who work really well and efficiently are rewarded with more work and efficient, and we're asking
Yes.
people, and then they give and give and give until they can't give anymore,
Yeah.
and we've totally burnt them out instead of trying to, like you said, collaborate and find other ways to fill the gap or fill the need. So yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. I think, the opposite of scarcity mindset is abundance mindset,
Yeah.
right? And it sounds like wishful thinking, but okay, yeah, we don't have the funding that we need now, but it's thinking creatively about how we
Mhm,
can bring it in, right?
mhm.
It's, oh, we don't have the right story for this campaign right now. Okay, let's step back and think about how to engage the community with sharing that story instead of telling them what to say and
Right,
potentially exploiting them,
right.
right? So, yes, it takes a lot more work and a lot more mindfulness
Mhm.
and a lot more self awareness to be in abundance mindset.
Yes.
But I think we owe it to the communities we serve, the volunteers we engage to do that.
And I love that. I love the instead of looking at what we don't have, what do we have?
Yeah.
And how can we use that creatively? And one of the things that we used to do is, and this is where I believe, and I will tout it up and down, like we're having a volunteer advisory team, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Because they come up with some of the most magnificent solutions to things, especially because if they're the ones like on the ground doing a lot of the support,
Yeah.
um, they have fabulous ideas. Like, and so don't always feel like it's incumbent upon you to have to solve everything and come up with everything by yourself.
Yes.
Ask the people who are in the field doing it. And I'm telling you, the solutions that have come up were things that I had never thought of, like, and I probably would have never thought. But being in that room and asking people for ideas, and sometimes it wasn't one person's whole idea, but it was like a part of this one combined with the part of this one was like, oh, we can do that with what we have. I mean, yes, yes.
It's yes, the solutions are part of it, but what I've seen as well is you may believe that your issue, where the gap is a particular thing. But
Mm,
once you actually get that group of volunteers together, you speak with your colleagues from similar organizations, you may realize that the problem you thought you needed to solve is actually a different problem.
problem.
Right? And it might actually be a way easier problem to solve. But until you ask those questions about, I see this is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it's happening?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Tell me the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like I really love that question in terms of like digging into curiosity and understanding where people are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that builds the trust that we all need to bring together our volunteers with our community. to create that impact.
Okay. I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was talking to somebody who might be new to the field.
Mhm.
What if you're like 5 to 10 years into it and you're like jaded?
So, a few resources I would recommend. The first one is from our friends in the fundraising sector. So, have you heard of community centered fundraising?
I have not.
What I love about what they do is they are really looking at fundraising from an ethical and collaborative standpoint
Nice.
and understanding how historically philanthropy has really been centered around capitalism, white saviorism, patriarchy, right? Like let's just pause this for a minute, right? In the US, the father of modern philanthropy is Andrew Carnegie. You may have heard of him. There's a place where people play music in New York City that is very famous, named after him, right? Carnegie Hall. So he was the founder of modern philanthropy. He decided he wanted to give his money away. However, this is the same person who earned his money off the backs of unsafe labor, you know, exploiting workers.
Mhm.
And he turned it into, well, I'm being benevolent to these people, right? Instead of paying them a fair wage, that type of stuff. We still see this happening in society today, right? So if
Mhm.
that's where modern philanthropy comes from, right? So what community centered fundraising does, it considers, you know, workers' rights
Mm.
within the not for profit sector, right? Who fits in? People who look like me and you, Nicole, right? You don't see very many of us in the C-suite of nonprofits,
I know.
right? Like, and things like, oh, you have this corporate CEO who then decides pre-retirement, oh, I'll give back at a nonprofit, right? And earn six figures while I do it. A bit of a pay cut for my corporate job, but I'm fully qualified to
Yeah.
run a nonprofit. Whereas if you have someone who's worked in nonprofit their entire life, right, gets to the C suite and then goes and applies for a job for a CEO of a corporation, are they going to get that job?
No.
Right? So
No.
this is what I'm talking about in terms of the uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
Um, and one thing that I love about community centered fundraising, and I really encourage folks to look into that, look into their blog, is they have like 10 tenets,
Mm.
or I believe like they call them values. But
Mhm.
one of them is donations of time are equal to donations of money.
Oh, say it again for the people in
Right?
the back.
These folks, these fundraisers value
Oh,
volunteer engagement. And I've worked with a lot of fundraisers who don't,
who
right?
don't? Yeah.
But this group of folks, they do. So I really encourage folks to check out that resource. I also encourage folks to, you and I both know Brianna Dorielis
Yes.
very well, right?
Yes.
She talks about power and privilege
Mhm.
in terms of volunteerism and
Mhm.
how a lot of saviorism is brought into spaces where people believe they're doing good. They're
Yeah.
told they're being good people.
Yeah.
but really they're doing harm.
Yeah.
So those are the two resources I would encourage folks to check out if they're a little bit farther along in their journey and maybe feeling a little bit jaded.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because as you know, I am in this job hunt still.
Mhm.
Um and one of the things that I wanted to do was try to expand my opportunities because being a volunteer engagement professional and nonprofit is a very niche thing, which I didn't really realize until I was trying to get out of it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was like, well, let me expand my um my opportunities. And to your point, one of the biggest challenges that I had in trying to look for places in corporate spaces,
Mhm.
um people on the corporate side didn't really understand what
Yeah.
a volunteer manager does. And
Yep.
so it didn't translate. So one of the things I had to do my best was to show my transferable skills and similar things that I did. But and I cannot tell you how many people who I have met who have said the corporate space needs more people from nonprofit, like in like on CSR, because they were like, because they get it, they understand how nonprofit works, they understand. But it's a lot of times it's a lot of people who have come up in corporate, who have
Mhm.
worked up in corporate, and it's like, and it's so funny because it's very similar. Just like in nonprofit, a lot of times when you are working with volunteers, it's an add-on, it's an afterthought. Oh, well,
Yes.
uh you're in development or you're in marketing and we have somebody needs to look at the volunteers. Okay, it can be you, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes on the corporate side that happens too. It could be like, well, we want to start this program and you've done really well with your marketing, you know how to handle programs, so we're going to give you this, go for it. And
Yeah.
without that understanding of what volunteer engagement is,
Yeah.
and trying to break in to the other side has been very challenging, very difficult. Often because it's like, even though, and what do I know, right? I'm on the other end. It could be ATS. Maybe I'm not using keywords. Who knows what it is, right? Um, but just as I started to talk to more and more people on the corporate side, it was like, oh, like, and this isn't everybody. Like, you can't
Mhm.
put
Yeah.
everybody in this boat, but there's a lot of people who really don't understand, especially when it comes to recruiters.
Yeah.
They're they're coming from a corporate mindset, and if you've never been in nonprofit, you could see this here, and it's like, but that doesn't make sense because, and but if it's coming the other way around, like, people can go into corporate and easily bounce over to nonprofit because they
Yeah.
appreciate it, but going the opposite direction, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but just you don't see it happen near as much, in my personal opinion. You just don't see it near as much.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just, the corporate sector. I think in general, the public doesn't often understand how nonprofits work,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
And the public doesn't understand how volunteer engagement works.
100%.
And that's
Oh,
why we have job postings. Like I've applied for fairly senior roles
mhm.
as a volunteer engagement leader where the requirement was, oh, you have to have, marketing experience, you have to have uh experience with working with leadership volunteers, and it'd be great if you've been a volunteer. There's no mention of having a CVA, there's no mention of professional volunteer engagement experience, and it's just people aren't aware, right?
Alright.
And I've been in a conversation with a friend over lunch, and they were like, "Well, of course, nonprofit people should get paid less because their jobs aren't as hard. And we were talking about like CEO compensation because we were talking about, like, why do these nonprofit CEOs get paid six figures? And I was like,
Oh,
well, they're responsible for dozens, if not hundreds of employees sometimes, right? They have a duty to the donors, the volunteers, other stakeholders, partnerships, right? And it was like, well, yeah, but like the results are like not really measurable. It's not like a stock price goes up and that CEO is doing this with someone who, you know, is an accounting professional. And like really it's okay. Like they're very educated,
right,
but this isn't stuff that they have to learn,
right,
right?
right.
And I think it's partly what we need to do once you can get over that hump of being jaded, which is a little bit more where I would place myself now, right? Is to advocate for the sector, for the profession, for yourself.
100%.
And
100%.
and I and I 100% want to say that it's easier for me now that I've started my own business and
Mm,
I can talk about these uncomfortable things that happen
mm-hmm,
within nonprofits. Whereas if I was working for a nonprofit employer, it would be like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't say that, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But when you're having private conversations with your friends, with your family, right? These are things you can say. So if I could go back 10 years, I was in a car with my friends. We were going to a charitable run. One of my friends said, oh, well, they better give us t-shirts. And I just didn't say anything because I don't think I had my coffee that morning. Like I was just like, oh, like, what the heck? But what I would have said is, hey, t-shirts cost money. And like, I don't think any of us met the fundraising minimum for the t-shirt. Or I believe this particular organization, like, there was no fundraising minimum for a t-shirt. It was you fundraise, and any amount you fundraised, you can come and do the run. And if you wanted to buy a t-shirt, it was like 20 bucks.
Yeah.
Right. But I didn't go into like, look, those t-shirts cost money. Someone has to design the t-shirt. Someone has to hand out the t-shirt, even if it's a volunteer. Someone has to engage those volunteers, steward them. That all takes resources. And it's not like, oh, they're a charity. They should just give me stuff.
Yeah, it's such an interesting phenomenon. And unfortunately, if you're not in nonprofit and don't really touch it,
Yeah.
there's no way that you would know. There's no
Mhm.
way you would know, right? Because if you
But
have that
there's
corporate mindset, to where everything costs money and everything, and there's this often transactional exchange,
yeah.
you don't get that.
But I mean, it's the world we live in as well. Like, there's a train station downtown Toronto. I live in Toronto, and there is an area that is called like the freebie area. And every morning, there is some company handing out protein bars or bandanas or phone cases or whatever. Right. And it's just, oh, the stuff is free.
Yeah.
Right. So when we have this system of capitalism, right? And philanthropy is operating within that system.
Mhm,
That's what people are going to think is
mhm.
that nonprofits have to operate like
Right.
corporates
Right.
to
Right.
be successful.
Right.
And I think there are some organizations that are much more grassroots, that are much more community centered, right? Those organizations are doing the hard work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, if we have the bandwidth, if we have the interest, those are the organizations that we can volunteer with,
Yeah.
learn from,
Yeah.
collaborate with.
Mhm.
And that's going to move the needle
Needle. Yep.
towards focusing on the community rather than just defaulting to this system.
I'm gonna jump back just for a second.
Mhm,
In terms of like, well, like you said your friend like is an accountant and was just like
mhm,
talking because he just doesn't necessarily know any better. And one
mhm.
of the things, anecdotally, when was the last time that you walked into a networking event and you met another volunteer engagement professional? Usually, typically the only one in the room. And it's that, oh, you work for free? Like, no, I don't work
Yeah,
for
or they
free.
believe your entire job, "Oh, so you recruit volunteers." Right? And then here you are trying to do like a condensed 1.5 minute, elevator pitch of, no,
It's
actually, there's a cycle and it's all about stewardship and building relationships. And okay, so like you recruit and retain volunteers. Cool.
yeah. So so I love what you said. The biggest way that we can continue to do this is to advocate, right? Is to
Yeah.
advocate for the profession. And even little things like if you have your CVA, put it on everything. I cannot tell you the number of people who were like, oh, CVA, what is that? And it
Hmm.
gives me the opportunity to explain what the credential is, what we have to do in order to obtain it. And it lets people know that there's like a governing body out there, and this is like a viable profession. It's not just like, oh, well, you used to be a volunteer, anybody can do it.
Yeah. I mean, Erin Spink, love her. Like one of the things she said eons ago to me was, okay, you've been a volunteer, so you can be a leader of volunteers. Well, I brush my teeth every morning. Does that mean I'm a dentist?
Love it. Love that Aaron Spink.
Right? Like
Love her.
at all. So I think that's like a very good way to equate it,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, I've been a volunteer. I can do your job. Oh, well, I brushed my teeth this morning. I can be your dentist.
I love it. I'm putting that in my back pocket. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. That's awesome. But I think just like you said, what's so important just to continue to advocate because yes, you are right. It is not all sunshine and rainbows, but there are a lot of sunshine and rainbows in this work, in what we do, which is why we continue to do it. And I'm sure many people have heard. I know a fellow colleague of mine always used to say, I'm not in it for the income, I'm in it for the outcome.
Oh,
And
I
it's
love
true.
that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I still wish people would work on the
Income
income
side?
part
Yeah. Yeah,
because
yeah.
also you get what you pay for.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So it's like we want to have change, well, but we need to be able to equip people to be in a place who have that knowledge and that background and that understanding to be able to do it so that they're again, and this is me just, philosophizing. So like
Yeah.
people who are in nonprofit don't feel like they have to leave nonprofit in order to, one day buy a house. Because not
Yeah.
only are they not is the money not coming in, but the mental and the how draining nonprofit can be.
Oh my
It's like
goodness.
at least if if I was getting paid six figures, it would make it worth it, And then because people will feel badly, right? Because then
Yeah.
they're like, it's really not about the money, because it really isn't. But also, we want to be able to do things and have a 401k and save and have have our stability as well. And it's
And we deserve it. I think that's the
yeah.
part that we need to tell ourselves. We need to recognize potentially if we've been living in this scarcity mindset,
Mm,
right? We don't have enough, so I'm not going to ask for that pay raise.
right.
We don't have this. We just got our funding cut. So I'm not going to go look for a new job because the organization needs me,
Needs me.
right? It's no, I deserve this because I am, first of all, a human being, right? And second of all, someone who is talented, skilled, has something to offer. And like it boggles my mind when nonprofits are paying their employees wages that would qualify them to be clients. I'm sure we've all seen that, right? Like, if you look at some of the wages that are being paid, they are not a living wage
Yeah.
where those jobs need to be.
Yeah.
And again, let's not even talk about the skills, the talent, the expertise, the time that we bring.
Yeah.
We are human beings.
Yep.
Just because we chose this type of work doesn't mean we deserve to
Yes.
be treated differently, to be asked to be martyrs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I know that again, like bringing it back to history, a lot of nonprofit volunteerism work was done by folks who took religious vows. And some of those religious vows include a vow of poverty.
Right.
That, that's not me. I am a woman in the modern world. I am
You're like,
doing this
show me
work
the money.
and I am a human being.
Yeah.
We are human beings who need to function within this system and not be worried about, you know, are my bills going to get paid? Can I afford the next thing, et cetera, et cetera. And let's go back to that scarcity mindset. There is more than enough money in the world for all of us to live decently.
Yeah.
And another resource I will put out there is Ontario Nonprofit Network has done some stuff on decent work in the nonprofit sector.
Okay.
And Cassandra James from Volunteer Toronto has collaborated with them on decent work around volunteerism. So, what are those volunteer rights and responsibilities? And what does decent work mean when your wage is zero because you have decided to become a volunteer?
Right.
But I think that's something we all need to think about is decent work.
I like that. Decent work. I'm looking up some things because
Mm,
I'm grateful to Alive.
mm.
For people who may or may not know what it is, it's the Association of Leaders and Volunteer Engagement. They're doing so much great work. I know that we all just kind of signed it wasn't like a petition, but it was a document um to get our Department of Labor, I believe, to recognize volunteer engagement as a profession, like
Oh,
literally.
yes.
Yeah. So they've been doing that advocacy. Also just recently at the Points of Light conference, they put out the job leveling document that talks
Ooh.
about all the different titles and that you might see in volunteer engagement, but kind of to give some standardization. Like if your title is this, but you are doing all of these things, there's two things you should do. Perhaps you should ask for your title to be changed or consider asking for that raise because you are doing the work. You are doing director level work with a assistant title, just to give some standardization against the board. So I'm very grateful to Alive for that type of advocacy that they're doing. And as we continue to do things like that, like they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, but every
Mhm.
time we're
Yeah.
doing something little by little, in a year or two, it's going to inevitably have to look different because people are speaking up, people are standing up, and we're helping the people who are coming up behind us, right? If we're traveling that road first, it's helping
Yeah.
people come up behind us and the things that we're learning we can pass down. And as we get perhaps tired and jaded, they can pick it up and keep moving. You know what I mean? Like, and that's also that beautiful thing of collaboration and working together. Because eventually, just like the people who came before us, they're gonna get tired or retire, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's incumbent for us to be working together so that as they retire, we can continue to pick up the torch and move it forward. So yeah, like you said, it may not always be sunshine and rainbows, but there's a considerable amount there though.
There is a lot there. And I think that's the thing is things can exist in duality, right?
Yes,
Like
yes.
there is this system that we live in, right? That there is there's elements of oppression in nonprofit. There's elements of power dynamics, right? That are not conducive to
Mhm,
what we want to be doing or what we claim to be doing for
mhm.
communities, right? There's that. At the same time, there are amazing people doing amazing work,
Yeah.
right? And there is impact that is felt by our communities. And there is, you know, nonprofit is changing lives, it's changing communities, it's doing things for the environment, for the animals, right? For large issues, right? Like democracy and climate change, that without this system that is somewhat broken cannot be done. So we can hold both those things to be true,
Yeah.
but we need to be aware
Right.
of both of those things.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this is where training up again those who are coming up behind us and
Mhm.
teaching them the power of boundaries and
Mhm.
teaching them the power of speaking up in a meeting and having your voice and speaking out. Like you don't
Mhm.
always, like it's okay to set boundaries, and setting boundaries isn't a bad thing. Setting boundaries actually sets you up to be more helpful later.
Yes.
But if you continue, like just like a car, if you drive a car and you never put gas back in it, you are
Yeah.
going to run literally, the car is going to run out of gas. You will run out of gas, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Well, you're gonna get out and push, and then you're gonna need an energy
have
bar somewhere in there.
I'm like,
I don't want to get out and push either.
look, I hope we're like going downhill when that happens because, woo.
There's something that I think many of us have seen on the internet, but like when you say yes to something, what are you saying no to?
Right, you're saying no
Right?
to something else.
You really need to think about that. And the other thing I want to add to that is when you set boundaries, and when you advocate for yourself, your identity influences who you are at work. But until we start to have these uncomfortable conversations within organizations and within our workplaces and between us as leaders of volunteers, we're not going to get any further if we pretend everybody's experience with advocacy is the same.
Yeah. And so a couple of things, and this is number one, why I love coming all the way back down to what we were talking about at the very beginning is collaboration.
Yes.
And also that scarcity mindset, changing it, right?
Mm.
Start collaborating with others in your organization
Yeah.
that you build those relationships. So when it comes time to advocate, the relationship is built and it makes it a little bit easier because now it's not just stranger with my preconceived ideas and stranger with my preconceived ideas. But we've worked on
Yes.
community projects. We've worked on this. We've realized that our kids like the same stuff and, blah, blah,
And
blah, blah,
getting to know
blah.
each other on a heart level, right?
Yes,
Not just this is your name, these are the letters after your name, this is where you
right,
went to school,
right.
this is your title, this is the organization you work for. Where are you in that hierarchy?
Yep,
It's no, who are you in your heart?
right,
This is who I am in my
right,
heart.
right.
Let's
And
connect there.
yes. And then that way, when it does come time, it's not this person that I don't know. It's now, oh, that's my coworker, or dare even say, oh, friend or colleague
Yes.
I've worked
Yes.
really close with. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's get them in here. Let's get that voice. What do they need? And then I also, because this is just who I am, I love playing devil's advocate.
Okay.
Um, because the great thing about how far we've come culturally is that now there are a lot of organizations where people can work for nonprofits who are for the causes that they have, where people look like them, believe like them, think like them, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But they still won't speak up. So
Yeah.
it's like, because in that particular case, now it's not it's not a privilege because we're essentially the same. Nobody ever has the same lived
Yeah.
experience, right? Nobody
Yeah.
ever does. My daughter went to an HBCU.
Okay, cool.
My
That's
daughter went to
very
an
cool.
HBCU.
Okay.
And it was funny because a lot of the things that people would use then as excuse, I'm like, oh, but everybody looks like you now. So you can't, in this particular case, you can't use that excuse. What
Right.
are you using to now why aren't you speaking up? Now why aren't you setting your boundary? Now why aren't you?
Right.
In a case in a culture where you might be elsewhere where you are the only one,
Yeah.
okay, I could see where that could come into play, but now you're not.
And sometimes that does take some internal work, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
could take some therapy potentially. But I
Maybe.
think it is an element of self-awareness, right? And
Yeah,
what internal barriers do you have? Is it because in the past you were in a different situation and you spoke up and you had a bad experience there, and now
right,
you're letting it carry over and influencing an environment that's more built for you and more positive, right? But you're still resistant
right.
to, and that's what I mean by you got to get uncomfortable, right? Like the truths are uncomfortable,
Yeah,
but you yourself have to get out of that comfort zone
yeah,
of, well, that's just not going to work.
right, right. But how do you know if you never try?
Yeah. And, but that, it's hard.
Oh,
It is
100%.
really hard.
100%.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like different levels of hard. It's either hard and it's harder. Like it's never easy. It's
And
never
it's a lot of that internal work that, is very different than, updating a template on your
yeah,
volunteer management software or
yeah,
responding to emails or leading a training.
yeah,
That is work you're probably doing on the weekend. It's self-discovery work, and it's a different type of professional development, right?
yeah, yeah.
But when you reflect on that and you think about where you're coming from, your experiences, where you want to speak up, why, making those goals. I'm a big fan of SMART goals, right? Making those goals and then thinking, okay, well, what's the timeliness of this goal? When do I want to achieve it? And if I'm like, oh, I don't want to do it right now, oh, so uncomfortable, right? Then it's the hard part of digging into the why.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. 100%.
And you're not going to get that from a 1 hour workshop. Unfortunately, you're not going to get that from
No.
this podcast. That is work you have to do on your own.
Yeah.
But, I did that work and it was so fulfilling and enriching.
Mm-hmm.
So I really encourage others, and it is an investment of time. It's a privilege that some of us have that space to think. I 100% recognize that. But if and when you find that opportunity, do it.
You know, I like to say people find time and make space for things that's important to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even the busiest person in the world, if you're like, listen, if you can meet me here in 30 minutes and I'll give you $20 billion, I bet you they will find time to drive them 20 minutes to get that money. I'm just saying, we just have to prioritize it.
I'm
And
like, how long is the flight
yeah,
to
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yes. We have to prioritize it. We
Yeah.
just we just do. And I know, and we're gonna wrap up here in a second, but
Yeah, of
one
course.
of the things, like as I started to set boundaries, it was difficult. But my my sound mind and peace within me was
Yes.
worth it. And everything that I thought was so busy that just couldn't get done, I set the boundary. The stuff was still waiting and I still got it done, but I also now have my peace of mind. So I don't know, that's just a big thing for me. Like people will create time and space for what is important, right? Because it could be maybe you're binge watching Netflix for 6 hours.
Yeah. And
Which,
sometimes we need that, right?
yeah,
But
of course, no, 100%, 100%. Sometimes the binge watching is helping you.
yeah. Yeah.
Helping you escape, like I don't know, but yeah, but all of this to say, working in nonprofit is absolutely fulfilling because if you go into corporate, that's not all like sunshine and
It's definitely not sunshine and rainbows.
but I feel like people walk into corporate knowing and understanding that, but they don't walk into nonprofit knowing
Yes.
and it's just
Yes.
like it's managing that expectation of,
Mm-hmm.
hey, it's not going to be all roses every day,
Yeah.
but it will be amazing. But
Yeah.
just have a mind shift and be ready for that. Because then I feel like it's not nearly as disheartening when you know that walking into it, as opposed to you feel like you got like the bait and switch. Like,
Well, I mean, I know we're wrapping up, but one thing I will say is that at the end of the day, it's work.
yeah,
It's not a free time day with your
right,
family, your friends in front of Netflix at
right.
an amusement park. Like, it's work. So if you are enjoying 80+% of what you're doing,
Yeah.
you won.
Yes. Big time.
Right?
Big
But there
time.
is going to be a chunk,
Yeah.
even in the nonprofit sector, where it's not sunshine and rainbows. It's a little bit like, ooh, okay, how do we get through this messiness?
Yeah.
Right? But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, what we're doing is work.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
hard. It's not easy work.
It's not. It's not. It is not, but it is so fulfilling. So,
Yes. 100%.
yes. The number of precious moments that will never go away. You can't, it's kind of like labor. It's kind of like labor. Like in the middle of it, you're like, oh my gosh. And then you're like, oh, my child. And it's like, you forget, like you forget those labor pains. I mean, I remember every year on her birthday, but still, like outside of that, it's like the result was worth the work that had to be put into it in order for this beautiful thing to be created, Okay. We'll be talking for the next 2 hours. Jessica, how can people reach you?
Yeah, so find me on LinkedIn, Jessica Pang Parks. I'm based in Toronto, and also my website, learnwithjpp.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us on this episode of From the Suggestion Box. Navigating feedback, the good, the bad, and the say what, making sure that the good stuff doesn't go to your head, the bad stuff doesn't go to your heart. Make sure you click subscribe, like, share. Make sure you're sharing this out with others, because the more we know and the better informed we are, the better we are going to be. So thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.